Well, we're often asked the question, is being a missionary at Simple House safe? And I want to address this question from a couple angles. Over the history of Simple House, which we've been around since 2003, we've never had an assault or an attack on any of our missionaries during missionary work, despite going into the worst areas of town and the worst homeless camps, and always going into people's homes as opposed to, being a service center where people come to, which has its own dangers, and that can be quite problematic in and of itself. But we've never had an assault. The only two things that can happen that might be worthy of mentioning is I was mugged once, but I wasn't mugged during Simple House. I was just mugged in the good part of town while parking the car at 11 o'clock at night, not paying attention. And we had another guy who, in the first year, I think, of Simple House, a friend of mine, we didn't really have rules about how to behave or what to do or anything yet. It was very free form at that time. He did something that there's no way I would have thought was okay at the time, nor do I think is okay now. He went on this massive walk through the neighborhood all the way to the subway station, and he got mugged and he got beat up a little bit, and that was not good. But those are the only two things that have ever happened, one of which shouldn't have happened because we have rules against that and shouldn't happen. The other which just had nothing to do with being at Simple House. And at this point, I think given an average of 6 volunteers or more a year, and we've been around 13 years, I mean, we're talking, 70, 80 volunteer years have been spent here with really no tragic episodes. The other thing I want to say is that you're never really safe. Bad things go down in great neighborhoods. Bad things go down in bad neighborhoods. There are things that we all need to do to shelter ourselves from them. And I think one of them is just common sense. The other one is something that I sometimes call like the spidey sense, which is we tell our missionaries if they're uncomfortable or they don't feel right about a situation, they're not supposed to be brave. They're not supposed to doggedly do something. That when their spidey sense goes off, which Spider-Man has a special superpower of knowing when danger's around, he gets a tingling feeling, just leave. And if I ever feel like we have a volunteer that is naive in some way, that we don't feel like either has common sense or kind of has a spidey sense, we don't let that volunteer go out except with other volunteers we think have that. It happens occasionally, but we always make sure that we go out in pairs with that person, and they, have someone else with them who has the sense to get out if things aren't looking right. Another thing to think about, though, is that I don't want to say that this is perfectly safe and great. We're working with the poorest people in society. There are a lot of crime in these neighborhoods. There's lots of people who've committed crimes in these neighborhoods. Sometimes you could think poverty leads you to crime. That's fine. That's true. Crime also leads you to poverty. If you've been in prison, you almost always live in a poor neighborhood, So that changes the dynamics of how safe and careful we need to be. And if you just think about the number of murders in society today and the very small fraction of which are solved, I don't know if it's a small fraction, but I think it's only like 50% or something. And you also think about that a lot of people who go to, prison for murder only go 15, 20 years. We're meeting murderers, And if you don't think you're meeting murderers, you might be meeting murderers too. And it's just something that happens. And we need to love people, and there's the poorest of the poor, and we're not going to do anything foolish, but we're trying to love people to Christ, even murderers. Another issue with the whole idea of violence and whether or not it's safe is kind of the nature of violence. Violence in bad neighborhoods, at least in America, I've been in lots of bad neighborhoods, is got patterns. It's usually targeted. There's usually motive. The motive is sometimes really stupid. It's like young guys, they call it street life sometimes. They're running the street. They have all these issues. Valor, like, are they brave enough? Are they sticking up for their, where they're from, for their buddy? Are they mad about a girl? Is it about drugs? Is it about thieving? There's all these like dumb motives, but they're just not going around killing random people. It's targeted. It's like they might accidentally hurt someone who they're not intending to target, and that's a real danger, but it's just not random violence. Another issue is that there's a lot of lifestyle choice there. Is that if you're running the streets, even if you're not the one targeted, you're way more likely to become a victim of crime. Our volunteers aren't running the streets. They're not as likely to be a victim of crime. And the last thing is like time and place, say nothing happens good after, I don't know what the saying is, after midnight. I'd say after dark. We just don't do stuff during those hours, So if you're kind of keeping yourself in the best hours of the day, not living the lifestyle, not doing anything to get targeted, it's very unlikely that you're going to become a victim of a violent crime, even when you're in the worst neighborhoods of the city. Every once in a while, there's a act of violence that's very random, like a little girl is shot due to a random bullet or a stray bullet or something, or some other type of crime that's just especially heinous, like it's not about a lifestyle or a group of people or a motive. And that's when you see people in the inner city band together. That's when you see neighborhoods that don't cooperate with the police, and they make sure they do what they can to get those crimes solved. And maybe that's why those crimes don't happen very much. So in conclusion, 80 plus volunteer years, no major incidents. It is dangerous. I don't want to claim it's not. We try to take reasonable precautions at all times and use our common sense. We're not going out there merely thinking that we prayed that morning, therefore everything's going to be okay. So I want people to be aware. I want people to be alert, but we don't want to be consumed by fear. And I don't think you should be consumed by fear. Or if you're a parent, you've got your precious young adult who wants to be a missionary with us, please let them do it, and please understand that we'll do what we can to make everything as safe as possible.